we're doing is going one step deeper. We're looking at behavioral response, and we get a tremendously deep dive into this person's psyche. Go to work, they drive the car, and when it's empty, they go to the filling station, they fill it up, right?
Probably fall into that bucket.
Yeah, it's a very common thing. So once we have this data, and it's a huge amount of data, we're talking about 2 gigabits of data every time we do a driver session. If you get behind the wheel of a truck and you have a driver license, the fact of the matter is you can drive. So we needed people to understand the input in order to get the correct output. So we created a document and a scenario and input data. If you take that aggressor and you don't simply go into a defensive mode, you can translate that aggression into some form of energy and output.
Brent, thanks for making it down to the winner's show. Really liked your experience. You've got way more than your credentials are far more impressive than myself, and I'd love to just for you to tell us a bit more about what it is that you do at the moment, kind of take it back to kind of how you started, please. Well,
I'm probably twice your age, which give me double the credentials, but other than that, I think you've got your own place in the world. Look, I'm still a young man of 53. I've had the blessing and good fortune of being in multiple different types of logistics industries throughout my career, which has been amazing because I've been able to kind of touch on different areas of business and become really immersed and specialized in certain areas of business within the logistics framework. What happens to a lot of people is they end up in one career line and they become specialized, and that's great, and it has its place and it's perfect. I'm just fortunate to be able to spread my wings a little bit. So I started my career back in South Africa and had the most amazing sort of start to career. So came out of military, went into the restaurant trade for a while, did my usual waitering while I'm trying to find a job, get on my feet, etc. And one of my customers liked the way I engaged with him. So he offered me a job, and the job was as a sales representative. So day one of the job, I arrive and come dressed up, ready for the part, rushing out to sell. And he said to me, no, today we take the time, we'll do the inductions. And by the way, here's your T-shirt, and that's your truck.
What a way to start things off.
It was an incredible way to learn about business because, everybody rushes in and we all have this aspiration to be a manager, or we have this aspiration to be the operator. And we very often forget what it means to actually be the employee. And at grassroots, this is where it happens. So when you're given the opportunity to learn from the ground up, you really learn a few things. So for me, this is exactly what it was. And after spending a couple of weeks in the truck and lifting, carrying, pushing, pulling, etc., not driving, by the way, because I didn't have a heavy-duty truck license, but I was working with a crew. And the incredible thing was I then had the ability to go and sell to anybody, because I was talking from a factual base. I was talking from an experience base. So that gave me an amazing ability to be successful. And using that, every single job I've gone into, I've always looked at what goes on at the grassroots levels, what happens on the shop floor. Because when you understand shop floor, you understand the business, you understand the process, you understand the outcomes and the outputs, and then you have the ability to translate that into something further. And this is what's made me a successful leader, is not being a manager that dictates, but being a manager that understands, that empowers, that wants people to succeed in their own right. And when you allow people to be successful, it's incredible what they do with that bit of freedom. They just give it back. So this has kind of been my journey, and it's been building blocks. I came out of the military, so the obvious way you come out of military is you're an autocratic style manager. Why? Because when somebody says get down, you get down, otherwise you die. When you get into business, you don't push people around and shout at them. You have to start collaborating. You've got to start leading, showing them the way. My role as a leader was quite simple. It's how do I support you as an employee to be successful? What tools do you need and how can I empower you? How do we train you and develop you? How do we give you the skill sets? And that's where I am today.
That's powerful. That's powerful. I'd love to, for you to go into a bit more about the military side of things. That kind of more, I don't know if forceful is the right word, but it sounds very much like that's what you needed in that environment, because like you said, if you don't get down, you're dead. Why does that not transfer to business?
There's a place and time to give an order and for something to happen. And typically that place and time is always around something like safety or an environment where somebody can get injured if they don't adhere to very strict rules and regulations. But outside of that, if you're sitting in an office environment and the habit is to go blazing into the middle of the staff and start shouting at people because some customer complaint hit your desk and you haven't taken the time to listen and to understand what went wrong, and you're ready just to blaze at people, what's going to be the output? You're killing the corporate culture. You're creating an environment that is not at all conducive to growth or to development of people. Nobody wants to work for you. So if this is going to be your style, how do you engage people? So military is military and it has its place. And we had to do a mandatory military training. It was a 2-year service. And actually was an amazing time. As long as you towed the line, you did what you had to do. You took whatever shortcuts you could, as everybody does. And it was great fun. But it was very much a dictated operation. So if we said do, you do. And, again, I had the benefit in the military of actually growing somewhat. So I attained some rank and leadership roles. But it was a national call-up system. It wasn't a permanent force. So at the end of my time, I moved on and then it was sort of getting into business. I studied whilst I worked. I studied in road transport specifically. That was my field of expertise. But I did it at a time while I was earning income and actually gaining a lot of experience from the workplace. I've worked with some incredibly good managers and bosses and some incredibly bad managers and bosses. And again, if you can take the time and opportunity to listen and learn from them, you know what not to do, when, or what you should be doing. And, leadership is a transition. Everybody thinks that because you attain the position of a manager, that automatically you're a leader. This is not true.
What qualities do you think it takes to transition from just being a manager into a leader?
So the first and biggest thing for me is the ability to listen to people. Managers tend to want to reach an outcome. So it becomes a forceful nature because very often it's a KPI-driven output and you tend to tell a lot rather than to encourage people to perform. A leader takes on a completely different approach. The role of a leader is to empower, engage, and to promote people into a successful environment. When you create a culture of success around you, people want to work for organizations like that. They want to be successful. So, frankly speaking, when you can be completely hands-off and you know it's going to happen, then this is leadership in action. I use the example of if I don't turn up for work for a day, the office doesn't stop. It just happens.
And that must take a lot of trust between both parties.
Exactly. It takes a huge amount of trust. And you continue to coach and mentor people through this process. And people quite often are not ready for it. So you really have to do a lot of hand-holding and empowering. But it's not abdicating. And this is important. So the role of a leader is not to tell and set people free and let them fail. You have to watch closely. So I always create an environment that's a measured environment. So I might give you a lot of freedom to do something, but here's your framework. Work within this framework, meet these KPIs, meet these objectives. And by the way, my door's open. My phone's on. So if you need me, call or come and see me. And let's talk through if you've hit a roadblock. Let's talk through if there's a problem. Or in fact, let's do one better. Let's celebrate the success.
Right. That's important. It's because it's not all about, KPI. Very few people, including myself, definitely admit this in the beginning. There was very much, we need to get this done. We need to make this many phone calls. And then we hit that target. It's like, okay, on to the next. It's very important. I'm learning for morale, for a bunch of other things to say, do you know what? Yes, we did well for that particular thing. Let's move on to the next. So after you started on a grassroots level, you progressed up. What was next for you?
So I moved through a couple of companies in South Africa, mostly again in the trucking industry, doing a lot of cross-border operations as well. And I'd managed to build myself up into a country manager position with one of the organizations. Spent about 8 years with them learning a tremendous amount. Family business, so very personal, very cliquey, but successful. And then I was approached by a chap that worked for FedEx, and they encouraged me to join them. So that was a nice experience because it was an entirely different area of logistics, entirely different area of thinking. And if you look at, FedEx's people policy, they call it PSP, so People, Service, Profit. It's all about people creating the right kind of environment, the right kind of customer experience, and that in itself translates back into profit for organization. And that's just a continuous improvement cycle. I was with FedEx for a while, and unfortunately there was a big downsizing exercise, and they let about 200 people go from the organization. The good old-fashioned last in, first out took place, and as I was one of the last senior managers in at the time, I was also one of the first out the door. And that's okay. Then I moved into a trainee sector, so I studied through University of Johannesburg, and I was actually approached by them for a training company which was in the e-learning space. So the first foray into training and development, but of course in the digital space. And this was all the way back in sort of 2000, so 2002. So early days in e-learning as well. No huge uptake. There weren't any drivers like COVID that made people work from home or study from home. So we were trying to engage customers. But it was an amazing experience for a number of years. I acted as a course mentor as well as a course researcher and developer, and everything to do with logistics space. So getting into freight forwarding, dangerous goods transportation, air and sea operations, and so forth. So it was pretty cool. We had some global customers like Kintetsu World Express and others. And it was nice to be in that space of kind of developing not only a software solution, but equally looking at content and material, and having to really do a deep dive into learning didactics and try, because it's an e-learning environment, it was the early foray into gamification. So getting people to engage and to participate, because if you just put a book in front of somebody, that individual has to be very driven to study from the book and come up with something, right? So it's not as simple as that. You actually have to create a process.
How did you gamify that?
So a lot of it was to do with having a course outcome, and the course was broken up into a modular series of challenges. And then what we would do is try and create a real life scenario with particular problems, and this person would have to go into a discovery room as such. In there would be things related to legislation, related to theoretical approach, related to other companies' experiences within the same domain. And they would gather information to build up the answer to the challenge. Now, the outcome of the challenge would be sometimes a written document, sometimes a completion of a document. For example, we created a bill of lading. So bill of lading is a shipping document for sea. And you have to be very accurate about the information you put into it because it is a negotiable document. So it has problems associated with trade finance if it's not completed correctly and so forth. So we needed people to understand the input in order to get the correct output. So we created a document and a scenario and input data and let them complete it. And then, of course, it went into a live mentoring scenario. So I would be somebody looking at this bill of lading, looking for errors, looking for complexities, and then giving course feedback. And this taught me a little bit about human nature and the reality of how people learn in a different way. So having to engage people on their terms. And so that was an amazing learning experience.
Tell us a bit more about that in terms of how you went around maybe adapting your teaching style to suit different people's needs. How did you go about doing that?
So EQ is something spoken about more recent years. But I suppose in a sense we all understand EQ, and even though it wasn't necessarily something that HR practitioners were talking about, it's something that we learned about. And you learn about or develop your EQ by engaging with different people and their responses and how you would react. So using examples of somebody who comes in as an aggressor, what's your natural behavior is, of course, you become a defender. But if you take that aggressor and you don't simply go into a defensive mode, you can translate that aggression into some form of energy and output. But you can manage the situation simply by taking the person down a couple of notches in a calm way, right? So that would be an example of how people engage. And you'd see typically in a call center environment, this is where it works really, really well. Because quite often you'll get a customer on the phone absolutely going crazy about his package didn't deliver on time, or there was damage or something of this nature. And you want that person to come down a few notches so you can engage in a professional manner and then resolve the issue. You always want to help, but if you've got somebody attacking you, it's very difficult to help. So that would just be one example of some adjustments, but there would be others where you could see people getting frustrated because they're not understanding a particular output or they're getting things wrong. So that kind of person, you want to encourage them to be successful. How do you do that? You've got to understand where the problem lies. Often you need to look beyond the scenario to what other mitigating factors are driving this person's current behavior. So I do it with my staff. If I see somebody's having an off day, they've made a mistake, I don't quickly write a warning letter. What I want to understand is why, what happened? What was different today that is not a traditional behavior that I've seen over the weeks or months prior? So something's changed. And when you start to really want to understand people and you can understand what's driving their behavior, what you also notice is why they make a mistake.
Right.
Right. So, and then adjust from there. Now, that doesn't mean that everybody has the freedom to come and make a mistake because their wife shouted at them on the way to work. There's a responsibility. But at least if you can understand it, you can engage and you can try to adjust. And then you try to give the person the tools. And I'm not talking about marriage counseling. I'm talking simply the tools in the work environment to try and segregate home from work and strike the balance. Very difficult. Many people bring work home and home work.
I can imagine. And you also need the right person to be able to receive that, right? Because it's not the easiest thing to perhaps, maybe have a conversation with someone and say, listen, I'm having issues at home. How do you navigate that, So what are you doing just now, then, Brent?
So I've joined a company, a startup company. It's actually at an accelerator phase. It's called the AI Driving Hub. And this is a super exciting project. What it is around driver training and assessment. Now, that doesn't sound like anything like really cool, but think about this. There's a couple of factors. Firstly, there is a huge shortage of drivers globally. And part of that is also is really because drivers are not regarded as being a professional industry to work in. Now, not in every country. There are countries where drivers are really held in esteem. But it's not one of those professions that you might look at a guy and go, wow, you're a doctor, you're a neurosurgeon, you're a driver. It's a bit of a pity. Yet they're a driver of the economy because goods move. Without drivers, goods don't move. So this is the one aspect. We use simulators, which also is nothing new. But what we do, which is really cool, is we use artificial intelligence to now understand the behavioral components of a driver. So everything I've spoken about is always about behavior. So even the driver for me is about behavior. If you get behind the wheel of a truck and you have a driver license, the fact of the matter is you can drive. You've been through the test, somebody's given you the qualification, you've got the little card that says you can drive. But it doesn't mean you're a good driver or a bad driver. It doesn't mean that you're suitable for passenger or goods transport, because your style of driving, your behavioral attributes will affect the way that you apply yourself on the road. And again, I use the word aggression. If you tend to be an aggressive driver, you're heavy on the accelerator, you're chasing up behind people, you're driving the vehicle in a very abusive or aggressive manner, it's only a matter of time before there's going to be an accident. It's a fact. So we then need to look at the behavioral aspect of it and try to bring this person into a more realistic space when he's behind the wheel of a vehicle. So the artificial intelligence is designed around the driver sitting in a simulator doing a 15-minute stint, which then will have a huge number of interventions. So this driver will react. Now, part of it is having a wristwatch, which picks up the galvanic skin response.
Right.
We pick up the heart rate. We pick up other bodily fluctuations, exactly. And the other thing is they wear a pair of glasses so we can also see where are they looking on the screen. So we observe things like missing vital road signs, maybe not picking up things going on around that may be a risk aversion Yeah, maybe the guy's distracted. He likes looking at the billboards as he's driving past instead of focusing in areas where he should be focused. So once we have this data, and it's a huge amount of data, we're talking about 2 gigabits of data every time we do a driver session, and we get a tremendously deep dive into this person's psyche. And then from there, we can start to look at areas of weakness and areas of strength. And the idea is to now be able to hyper-focus in areas of weakness, so we continue to engage the person in areas where they do need support and development. If you're strong in an area, let's not worry too much about that. That may be a future sort of thing we can look at. Now, this is slightly different from doing a classroom intervention, because there you get told and people are sitting looking at a screen and listening to somebody telling them about something. Learning comes through application, doesn't necessarily come through telling, and different people learn in different ways. But the best part of learning is actually doing. And if you can experience it firsthand and you can see what your faults are, and we can illustrate to you specific graphic inputs, you can see where you went wrong and identify with that. And I want to use a little example. So we had a chap in the other day. We were talking about eco-driving. So eco-driving, people don't even think about how much consumption in my vehicle. They just go to work, they drive the car, and when it's empty, they go to the filling station, they fill it up, right?
Probably fall into that bucket.
Yeah, it's a very common thing. He went through our simulator, and one of the areas we identified was exactly that, is eco-driving. So we explained to him what that means. He's pretty constant on the accelerator, thankfully, so he's not pulsing the accelerator.
Right.
But at the same time, when he pulls away from the traffic lights, he's quite aggressive on the accelerator, meaning he's burning a lot of fuel. Not only does it burn fuel, but you're talking about engine maintenance, you're talking about other impacts on the vehicle that you don't even think about. So when I saw him a little later, a couple of days later, he said to me, do you know, I never ever thought about it. I had to go to my car and find where the dial is that tells me what my average liters per 100 is. And he said all of a sudden he found himself now driving more economically. He's busy watching this gauge because it was an awareness. And this is my example of when you apply a certain learning, this is at a subliminal level. He took it home. We didn't say to him, hey man, you've got to go and focus on your eco-driving. He automatically started changing his behavior.
Own initiative.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And this is where it's super cool, really exciting.
I think the level of detail you guys are going into is incredible with, skin measurements. What was the exact term you said?
The galvanic skin response.
What does that mean, galvanic?
So what it means is picking up things like your sweat response when you're stressed. So it's looking for stress factors.
Like a lie detector type of situation. Wow.
Exactly.
Wow.
Yeah.
The level of detail there is incredible. I can see how you can build, this 2 gig of data per kind of a simulation. Incredible. So many applications, especially with the way the world is going in terms of autonomous vehicles and.
So one of our big drivers is actually data gathering for autonomous vehicle developers.
Right.
And the reason for this is you can look at vehicles like Teslas. They're gathering data all the time with all the users that own cars. But what is it doing? It's reading the vehicle's response, which obviously is driven by somebody. So somebody's reacting in a fashion. What we're doing is going one step deeper. We're looking at behavioral response. And the data we collect is very, very intensive 15 minutes multiplied by thousands of users. So it's an incredible amount of data that can be aggregated across a human response in certain predefined conditions. So it also makes for very interesting data.
Powerful.
Yeah.
Powerful. We'll need a part 2. Brent, thank you so much for your time.
It's an absolute pleasure. Thank you for yours.
Fantastic.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed the conversation. If you liked it, leave a like, share, comment, subscribe, leave a good review, good rating. And if there is someone else that you'd like me to have a chat with, let me know in the comment section. Again, don't forget to share this. That's how we're going to get the word out there. That's how we're going to build a community around what we're doing here. Follow us on Instagram, LinkedIn, all kind of major platforms, and we'll be releasing every week. So stay tuned.